So we actually have very few slides for our update on the Great Seneca Plan, but one of them, or two of them actually, are devoted to our schedule. And we really wanted to come back to you tonight to talk about the implementation piece of the master plan, which I think we haven't discussed in depth, although it's been part of our presentations in the past. So that's going to be the focus of the night. And I only actually really have one slide with 4 items, and it will be more of a discussion. We'll explain, you know, what we're doing, what we're thinking, and then we can have a back and forth. But first, let's see. We are, most of you are familiar with our timeline, but we obviously are closing in on our, you know, now year plus process. We officially started in spring 2022, although we started work before then with this committee and with our internal team. And we are right now at our preliminary recommendations, which we presented to all of you at our last meeting. And we are working towards the working draft. So with the tweaks that are coming from our preliminary recommendations, but from other stakeholders, but then also what we hope to hear from the planning board next week is more feedback, which will go into our working draft. And part of that is this implementation piece that I will share now. So these are our main implementation recommendations for the Life Sciences Center, and I will explain each one, and then perhaps we can discuss, or people can ask questions as we go along on each bullet. So one of the big pieces, which will be kind of concurrent with the plan, it's not actually part of the plan, is we're recommending an overlay zone over the entire life sciences center. And what we're imagining for this zone is that it can really help support kind of the mixed use life science and residential uses that we want to see in this area. We will have elements that will incentivize the production of affordable housing, but the overlay zone will also just allow more housing to be built. Currently, in the Life Sciences Center, some of the properties are zoned CR, which allow commercial uses and residential uses, but do not allow life science uses. And some of the properties are zoned LSC, which is a life science center zone. And they obviously do allow life science uses, but they only allow up to 30% residential uses on the site. So part of what our overlay zone will do is to increase the amount of residential that's allowed on these parcels past the 30% that is currently allowed. And we will also, as part of the overlay zone, allow life science uses in the CR zone. So it's kind of expanding both the residential and the CR uses throughout the area, so that there are more opportunities on each site and more flexibility, really. And then as part of the overlay zone, we are also exploring ways to incentivize the production of our moderately priced dwelling units, which are affordable or more affordable units. And that, developers could access higher densities if they were to produce more affordable units on a given parcel in the Life Science Center. I should say that this, Bellward is deed restricted in terms of how it can, what it can build. So this would not affect Bellward and their ability to build residential. But for the other LSC zoned properties, it would allow more housing. And then, part of the idea of this overlay was also to have some additional design guidance for how buildings are placed and where parking is allowed and how the built environment really interacts with the street and the public realm. It's something that we've talked with our regulatory planners at who review development applications as they come in, and they've struggled to sometimes get the types of building and public realm that we hope to see in this area and that the 2010 plan envisioned. So part of the overlay will also include um, language about that. And I was just pinged that do we all understand what an overlay zone is? And I probably should have started with that. Um, so thank you, Steve. Uh, so in overlay zone, and I'm probably going to butcher this, so Jessica might have to jump in. But basically, an overlay zone is we can put it on top of a specific area. So saying, I'm saying the Life Sciences Center, and then what happens is you can add kind of additional guidance for the area without changing the underlying mapped zoning. So what that means is that as the parcels are zoned today, that would remain, and what we're changing, we're making the changes through the overlay zone. And one thing that allows is to not completely change all of the zoning. Sometimes people or developers have zoning, they have a plan for it, and changing it could be disruptive to existing plans or could put existing structures out of conformance if we were to change the zoning. So this is one of the ways that we're able to add additional flexibility and add additional incentives without having to make all of those zoning changes. We're also able to add those incentives, which aren't part of any zone that we have in our code right now, but into this overlay zone. So I hope that was clear. If it isn't, feel free to drop a comment in there, Phil, or raise your hand. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, you mentioned the limit 30% housing for at least one of the. Is that the CR zone that you're talking about, or which?
No, it's the LSC zone allows up to 30% housing currently. And so if you think about the Life Sciences Center, the properties that are zoned LSC are part of USG, and then also the LSC Central, so that area that's kind of the center or the core of the Life Sciences Center. And Bellward is also zoned LSC. And then most of the other properties are zoned CR. And one thing that we found is that, CR doesn't allow also the life science use, although it does allow some other uses that are life science related that the LSC zone doesn't allow. So we're trying to rectify some of that, those like missing uses in each of the zones through this overlay. The CR zone, um, in the name of the zone, when you see it printed on the map, it tells you how much of residential is allowed. So usually we do this by saying, like you might see uh, uh, like a CR1, I'm just going to use as an example, would be, and then you might see C dash 0.5 R dash 1. And what that means is that CR1 would mean that the site can build out to 100% basically of the area of the parcel, but that doesn't mean that it can cover the whole parcel. It usually means that, like, say that it's a two-story building, it could occupy half of the lot. Um, and only 50% of that could be commercial or and then the other 50% could be residential, or because it goes up to R1, that means that 100% of the site could be dedicated to residential. So when you look at our zoning code, that's like what those numbers mean, and the residential, you know, is in the in how each zone is written.
So,
Sorry.
Maren, appreciate that. I'm just curious, the LSC in particular, and you said I thought I recalled that Bellward was LSC among others, and I mean, I know, from our many discussions over time, for instance, Bellward has other considerations besides just zoning that would limit it from building housing on Bellward, and I'm assuming we're not trying to, you know, work around those kind of limitations with Bellward, for instance. But I'm also curious what the other properties that you mentioned are pretty heavily commercial. So I'm wondering where there's an opportunity to do, unless you're doing a conversion to residential or something on an older building or something, where you might have an opportunity in LSC. But I guess, the bigger point is this seems like an interesting and important topic all by itself if we're talking about zoning changes that as the specifics of that as part of the recommendation, and not just a bullet that we might want to spend some time on. My broader comment. So anyway, I'll stop talking now.
So I see a couple of questions and replies in the chat, and I think this also relates to kind of our intent, Phil. And I think if folks remember, one of our main big ideas that we presented, way back when, before I went on maternity leave, so it was a long time ago. And then I think more recently, when we presented our preliminary recommendations, is that we really see an important part of the 2010 plan vision as this area becomes more mixed use. Right now, we do have residential uses that are concentrated primarily on the northern side of Key West. And we also have life science uses, institutional uses such as Adventist, as well as USG. And we also have the residential uses of the Elms at PSTA, which is under construction. And one thing that we see is, or that we think part of being mixed use is having more infill development of residential uses of housing on these life science and institutional properties. We actually haven't explored anything with USG, and Upneat did drop in the chat that they're not looking into student housing at USG. But a lot of the properties in that central area, Phil, as actually we think have potential for redevelopment. And sometimes it's not the whole site, but it would be pieces of the site. For example, like a surface parking lot, on one of the sites. And that's actually what they're doing with some of the commercial uses too on the ARE properties, the former Montgomery medical campus site that ARE bought from Johns Hopkins is redeveloping a surface parking lot. So there are spaces like that. There are also county and state-owned properties where we see the potential for future redevelopment, as well as some sites that maybe aren't going to redevelop now, but that as these office buildings reach their, kind of obsolescence or their useful life, they may be torn down and rebuilt, as we're hearing that may happen north of Key West. So, so that's really the intent, is to bring in this mix of uses so that we have kind of activation around the clock, in terms of, there's workers there during the day, and there are people who live there in the evening time. And, also just as part of our mission, at, directed by the council, is really pursuing more housing everywhere in terms of in order to meet our housing goals. Mark, go ahead. I know you had your hand up too. And then Andrew, sorry.
Yeah, I think you just kind of answered what my question was going to be, so I'm good, thanks.
I have a That might be a foolish question, but that's the kind of question I like to ask.
Oh, Andrew.
So why an overlay zone instead of redefining the LSC zone?
So there are two reasons for that, really. One is that the LSC zone isn't only in this area; it's
Oh,
also in Germantown. There is an LSC. There's some properties that are zoned LSC, and as well as in White Oak. So even though it's kind of conceived here, it is in other parts of the county, and the department felt that it shouldn't be done through an area plan. It should be done through a different effort if we're going to revisit and change the LSC zone. And I would also just add that this area is, I would say, kind of more dense and has a different form than the Germantown and White Oak properties as well. So that is part of it. The other piece, I think, is that we still really want to recognize that this is a life science hub and that is its character in a lot of ways. So we don't want to step away from that completely and, put a CR zone on top of the area. We think that that's an important part of its identity. It's also an important part of its, of the economic health of the area and of the county and the region is having these life science uses. So we want to keep that zone, but just make more flexibility in the area. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, I knew there was an obvious answer. I completely forgot there's LSC zones elsewhere.
You know what? I didn't even know there was until I worked on this plan. So, Gary, I saw you.
Yeah, a quick question. Maybe this is a process question. That when you do the master plan, you don't do the zoning. The zoning is a separate action taken by the planning board and council, so that you can move forward with this plan and don't necessarily have to have the changes to the zone. That comes later with another action before the planning board and council. Am I right on that?
Yeah, so the sectional map amendment is the technical, we're actually making the zoning change. But we do include the zoning recommendations in the master plan, which direct the sectional map amendment. This overlay zone will also be, although the recommendation to establish an overlay zone will be in the master plan, the actual text of the overlay zone will be separate from the master plan, and that will be voted on by council separately from the master plan also.
Right. I just thought it was important for people to know you don't have to agree on the language with the overlay zone is right now. It's the concept that we're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, and so getting that the feedback, as you're saying, Gary, that's very helpful on the concept will be important for us as we work on the overlay zone, because we actually don't have that language, have not brought it up the chain yet, even internally. So that is something that we'll come back to the committee with as we continue to work on it. So this is really, the overlay zone is a work in progress, and as I said, we can come back to the committee with language as we get it kind of more tighter. Right now, it is these are the ideas in it, and we're working out the best ways to create these incentives through conversations with folks like yourself, as well as developers and internally with our staff, so that we can understand the impacts of what we are recommending from different perspectives in the planning department.
And Maren, before you move to the next item, I did want to note that in addition to the sort of idea in the overlay zone to, establish more housing and to incentivize more housing, that the overlay zone will also include, or we're recommending it will include, development standards. And I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about over the last few meetings that we've had is, okay, well, the 2010 plan had a very similar vision. How are we actually going to achieve this vision. And so through the overlay zone, we're also envisioning that there would be development standards that specifically require buildings to be, located along the street frontage, and sort of thinking through the placement of buildings, of parking, of accessory structures, also thinking about the forms of those buildings. So the overlay zone, kind of once we get to the point where we have, language that we can share with you, it will likely include a purpose statement. It will include land uses that are permitted as well as prohibited. And it will include language related to the incentives that Maren was discussing, as well as development standards, to really kind of make sure that through development that happens subsequent to the plan, it is contributing back to the vision that we've been talking about, for the last several months.
And so I'll keep going, but people can feel free to drop questions in the chat or raise your hand and jump in. The next piece of the implementation comes from that. One thing that we've heard from people who worked on the 2010 plan, a lot of the people who've been in this committee, is that something that has been missing is kind of that sense of place, as well as some of the amenities that were imagined in the 2010 plan. And one thing that we've started to see over the past 10 years since the plan was approved and adopted is the delivery of privately owned public open space. But we haven't seen, that kind of promoted and programmed. We also, I think that in the first meeting that the visioning meeting that I had with you all, several years ago when we were talking about the last amendment, I asked, what do you call this place, or what would you call the Life Sciences Center, the Great Seneca? And we had a bunch of different names, and there was not that much agreement. And I think we think that this place that is so crucial and important to the county as a, economic and innovation hub needs to have an identity, and that might be in coordination with other with the municipalities, but that we need to establish an entity of sorts that can brand and promote and program the area. So that's things like, it could be installing wayfinding signs. It could be, holding a class at one of the privately owned public plazas that have been built, or open spaces that are coming in with the new development on Darnestown Road. So it's things like that, but just creating kind of that coordination between business owners, property owners, but also between residents as well. And what we see is this entity, which I keep calling it an entity, because we've been working with a consultant to explore different models for establishing an entity that can do this type of work. It would not be through the planning department, because we think that this is beyond what our role is and where our expertise is, but that might be in partnership with the county and, as I said, property owners and residents and community members. And we've been working with a consultant to look at different models. So as the council and through this plan look at what that might be, when this entity is established, or with the adoption of the new plan, we see this entity replacing what is currently the GSSC IAC. So it would replace this group and really take on implementation of this plan in certain ways, and also new initiatives and efforts as well. So it would be a separate group, not run through the planning department, and that would continue to hopefully have coordination with county agencies, with community members and property owners as members. And there are lots of models of this. We're looking at some very close by, and we've looked at things like bids, but we've also looked at things like innovation districts, and we're working out what would be appropriate for this area specifically. So again, this is kind of the idea, and we're continuing to work out the details. And we might not be the well, we definitely won't be the deciders, but we might even offer like an option to the planning board, to the council, to say these are the things we looked at. What is the right way to proceed with this, and that will be an initiative that is beyond us. And sorry, Jessica, did you want to?
I guess I'm just curious if there are thoughts about this. And Upneat, maybe you can kick us off. I see you have your hand raised.
Well, my first question is I know I've been joining these meetings for a while now, but how much of this is a discussion versus us listening to y'all presentation? Because if it's a discussion, I have a lot of thoughts about this.
It's a discussion, as well as, I think as we go like bullet by bullet, I think it makes sense to discuss for each bullet.
Okay. In terms of branding, I just sent you guys a message about this as well through email. We have a group of internal leadership mixed with some external leaders, CEOs of various companies in the immediate area. And we had a meeting this morning, and this exact issue was brought up. And ironically, I also said we should meet with the GSSC team because we have a meeting this evening, and I'll bring it up with y'all. And now you've transitioned perfectly. But during our discussions, we're talking about growing the workforce and why private sector would want to be invested in this immediate area. Why would they want to be invested in the future of USG? Why would USG want to be invested in the future of this community and the region? And a reoccurring theme that myself and Miss Catherine Leggett keep bringing up is that we need to brand ourselves better. And when you think about life sciences, or you think about any industry, you got tech in San Francisco and Austin. When you think about San Francisco and Austin, you're thinking about their boom in tech, right? When you think about life sciences, maybe or innovation up in Boston, the MIT area, you understand what their brand is. Here, I don't think that that's as apparent, and individuals on the call, both internal and external to USG, agree with that. And so I like where this is headed, because if we want to grow all of our individual brands, the companies themselves, USG, ourselves, et cetera, it would be great for us to be in a community that people recognize nationally.
Yeah, I think that's so well put, Upneat, and I think that is very much where this recommendation came from. Is that exactly that? We are suburban Maryland is always on the list of kind of top life science locations, near the top, but it's kind of amorphous, and people don't know where this is. So I think that it's great to also hear that you are maybe there are seeds of this sprouting up, because I do think it needs to be an effort that, like I said, is not led by the planning department. So the more stakeholders that are invested in this collaboration, the better.
Yeah, and I think that, and another aspect of that was, the longevity of success in this area, or in that area, because I don't live there, but in the longevity of success there. Young people, younger millennials, Gen Z, are tending to flock towards happening places, so to speak, right? And some of the businesses that were on the call this morning mentioned that young people in my age group, 20s to 30s, tend to stay at a company for 2 to 3 years and then end up leaving. What can we do to sort of keep that talent around, keep individuals wanting to be in that area? And I think that this is one of those tools that can be used when we talk about the longevity of success of the Great Seneca Science Corridor.
So I'll take that as a resounding yes for that one, for that recommendation. But yeah, any update, I will follow up with you afterwards. I'll read your email and we can follow up. And this is an idea that we've been talking about when we talk to the property owners in the area and other institutional partners and organizations. So it's I know that USG has always been thinking about the greater area and their place in it. So thank you. Does this make sense to people? Do they, I mean, because this, I know this specific recommendation affects not just the institutions that we all represent, but also individuals, community members. And I just wanted to see if there was any thoughts on that, if there was need any clarification of what we're trying to do with this recommendation. And if not, I'm happy to move on to the next.
I'll just say, Phil, that I think overall it makes sense. Obviously there are a lot of, the devil's in the details. What kind of entity, how the entity is funded, what its powers and responsibilities are. Another one, is how it incorporates, stakeholders from, not just, the businesses in the vicinity, but also the, residents, municipalities, et cetera. I think these are, I think they're all achievable, and I think there are models for that, but they're clearly, how it's defined is critically important. So,
and I do want to say that we won't define it completely in the plan. That will, we may have recommendations for this entity, but some of those details that you're talking about would be worked out not by the planning department. I think one of the things that we're doing and that we are able to add to this conversation is having worked with consultant and also having our team do research related to this, getting case studies and pros and cons of different types of models and feasibility of different types of models. And I think we can highlight what, potential concerns are as well. But there are models, as you're saying, some that only have property owners, others that include government and community members as well. I think the Tyson's Corner partnership has that, where there are business, property owners, residents, and municipal representatives. So, there are different ways of doing it, and I don't know if it will be completely defined in this plan.
Having said that, I'd also add though that you all have been working on the implementation of this plan, sort of the plan that we're building on, right, of the 2010 plan for a really long time. And so we'd really appreciate, thoughts or feedback that you all have on like what you've seen that's worked really well through the IAC over the last, decade plus, what things like maybe didn't work that well that should be considered as an entity is organized. And, we'd welcome that today, but we'd also welcome it down the road, because this idea will have to, have more depth to it to kind of really advance the implementation. And so, we'd really welcome your thoughts in whatever form they might come, given the depth and breadth of your experience with this committee.
This is Paula, Jessica Marin. Thank you. I would just add, I think as you're sort of sketching out what this entity might look like, the funding mechanism has to be the top priority. You know, branding, promotion, activation, it takes money. And if there's not a secure funding mechanism, it'll fall apart very quickly. We've seen that happen so many places around the county.
Yes, and that is definitely one of the challenges as we go through this is trying to figure out what a successful funding mechanism could look like, one that's both
Yeah.
palatable and successful.
Yeah, I mean, just from a governmental standpoint, it's not really Gaithersburg, it's not really Rockville. You know, I think it probably has to be driven from the county.
Related to that, and I think Manisha had a question related to collaboration between Rockville and Gaithersburg. I think that there is a lot being done to promote and market suburban Maryland through the biohealth capital region entity that sort of promotes at a regional level. And I think that for what we're trying to suggest with this recommendation is we appreciate those efforts. We shouldn't, detract from those efforts. But if there are ways to brand, promote, program, through a financing mechanism, this area in collaboration with MCEDC and Gaithersburg and Rockville, we see that as being something that furthers the success of the area. And so I just wanted to kind of flag that in response to your comment, Manisha.
Also, go ahead, Gary. I know you have your hand
Yeah,
up.
okay. I just wanted to point out that council, maybe a month or a month and a half ago, approved something similar for Friendship Heights. And it was in conjunction with the similar, it's the same organization in DC. It's a combined DC Friendship Heights with contributions from both jurisdictions. And it is to market and to promote. And I was very impressed at the Friendship Heights TMD Advisory Committee presentation that the I guess executive director or one of the key people really have done an amazing job of promoting in relatively short order. So it may be a model you might want to look at, since the council already approved something similar for Friendship Heights.
Yes, that's always a good sign. Thank you for flagging that for us, Gary.
Thanks.
I guess the one thing I would note on the IAC, I mean, this is a long conversation. We could, I think, that we could all spend a lot of time brainstorming about the hows and whys and wherefores. But if you're using the IAC model, I think it's fair to note and point out that the biggest challenge with the IAC, of course, is that we're not a decision-making body, nor do we have the power to execute on it. We are an advisory, a true advisory committee, but we're also advisors to a certain extent. We're advisors to the advisors, right? Because the planning board is also at its core advisory in nature to the council, and so our ability to influence change is limited by the nature of what we are. An entity that would replace us needs to have much more, decision and execution authority than we have to accomplish the objectives that we're talking about. So I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yes, yeah, no, I think we agree with that, and that was, I think, also part of it is that we recognize that there needs to be a group that kind of has more resources and also the power to do some of this implementation that we're talking about as well. So yeah, thank you, Phil. Um, so then the next piece of this, and we talked about this as part of the 2021 amendment, the phase 1 amendment to the 2010 plan, is as part of this plan, we're recommending removing the staging requirements that were established by the 2010 plan. And, I think that one of the things that came across through our discussions through the last amendment is that the 2010 plan staging requirements were, kind of intertwined with the CCT. And because of that, when the CCT didn't move forward, it meant that progress in lots of areas, or in this plan area, did not move forward either. We're not able to. So it had kind of negative externalities, if you will, the staging requirements did. So we're recommending removing them. As part of this plan, I think we are, in addition to recommending transportation and amenities in the area, we are also examining ways to, as Paula said, funding is so important. So we're looking at funding mechanisms for the area, how we can fund the transportation and the kind of the parks and public space that we are recommending in this plan. And then another bullet, the next bullet is, which I believe is kind of connected to this also in some ways, is we recommend limited support for granting APF validity period extension requests for preliminary plans approved prior to October 30th, 2014. And that sounds very jargony and bureaucratic, but this was the discussion that we had several meetings back where we talked about these old approvals that had, been approved in the 1980s, 1990s, these preliminary plans, and then they kept receiving extension requests. So, they received extension requests from the planning board and blanket requests from the council. And so that we have these kind of long-standing plans that are not in line with how we would, what planning's best practices are today. And sometimes even the infrastructure or amenities that they're promised are not the things that we would even ask for or want today. So one of our implementation pieces is saying that we should limit granting these extensions in the Life Sciences Center area. Yes, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly support this, obviously. I mean, I think this is a major impediment to, progress in general, the APF extensions dating back decades. I'm a little bit vague as to why. I mean, first I would hope for stronger language than this, honestly. I mean, limit support, I would say eliminate any, the opportunity, except under, full council vote, essentially, extensions, APF extensions for preliminary plans. And, I would say, why are we cutting it off, at October 30th, 2014? The validity period, what is the validity period is how long, generally speaking, for nowadays for our, for these preliminary plans?
Usually 7 to 12 years. I think it's usually 7, and then there's like an extension window that is common. Jessica, is that correct? I don't deal with regulatory as much, so I'm not as up to date on this, but is that right?
I thought it was shorter than that.
Maybe it's
but
5 years.
we can double check that and circle back, unless Steve,
Yeah.
know off the top of your head. I know it's
Just-
not universal for all approvals, because some approvals will specify a specific validity period within their conditions of approval.
Mitch is maybe saying he knows. I
Yeah.
feel like
I,
people,
5 to 7 is sticking in my head, but
yeah, I think 5 to 7 is right also. And then I know that some of the extensions go to 12, but usually not beyond that. Mitch, did you have a?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I was just going to say that I think the language as you proposed it is fairly balanced between the arguments of no extensions to lots of extensions. You just in terms of Montgomery County trying to be a business friendly location, right? So just we've had this discussion before, but a lot of these sites, even if not fully developed, have made financial commitments, have paid for transportation infrastructure improvements, have done their part investing their approvals, right? And I totally understand the fact that it can't live forever, but I think the particulars of each situation need to be able to be fully evaluated in granting any extensions.
Thanks, Mitch. And Phil, did you have? I'm worried I cut you off. That you had more to say about this as well.
No, I mean, obviously there's going to be a diversity of opinions, and I understand, many of the reasons why we are in a situation where we have decades of extensions, recessions and so on. I think, it's interesting. I think you can get into, some deep and interesting discussions about what business friendliness means in a context of, approvals that extend decades, that are archaic, and that, really constrain the ability of the county to, to meet modern objectives and, evolving needs and so on. So, yeah, I mean, we want to be business friendly. We want to recognize investments. We also need to, not straitjacket our ability to deliver, great, great development in a timely fashion in areas that are demanding it. So, how do we balance that?
I also just, Phil, you had asked about sort of why October 30th, 2014, and I just wanted to respond to that. Our current zoning ordinance took effect on the state October 30th, 2014. So that's kind of the relationship to the date that we're citing here. A lot of the preliminary plans that remain valid were approved prior to the date. And so, we're just trying to make sure that any opportunity we can to bring development into compliance with the current zoning ordinance, that we sort of, take those opportunities where they exist, because things have really changed over the last couple of decades, and will continue to change, if the overlay zone proceeds. But we're really trying to make sure that the zoning can align with the vision that we've been working our way toward through this plan.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, I forgot that was a question. And then just this final bullet is very straightforward. It's just providing a list of recommendations to be carried out by partner agencies. And that should be, I mean, these are really considerations for them. The planning department is not an implementing agency, and we work very closely with MCDOT. But some other agencies, although we coordinate with them, they're not as integrated into the planning process. So this would be, for example, we met with Montgomery County Police Department, and there are some concerns that were raised by residents as part of our outreach effort. So we would be passing along that information and potentially, considerations to the police department. The same thing with other government agencies. Steve Finley spoke to the Department of Environmental Protection, and it's we have a recommendation about leveraging county programs such as the Rainscapes program, which has to do with stormwater management. So that would be a recommendation that would be included in this list. So it really has to do with making sure that we're passing along the information that we get from residents, that we get from property owners, that we get from people working and living and studying in this area, that are important but might not be part of a typical master plan. So that list will also go along with the working draft when we have it. And I know that this is just one slide, but it was a lot of information. So as Jessica said, we're happy to receive that feedback now, which we have gotten some of, but we are also happy to have feedback come to us later if anyone wants to meet, or if you want to send any of us a follow-up email with thoughts or questions. And then obviously this is still not the final stop in the master plan process.
It just keeps going, right, Maren?
Just forever and ever. I promise that there will not be a third amendment to the 2010 plan, or at least I will not be leading it. So as I mentioned, next week we're taking our draft preliminary recommendations to the planning board. We'll be presenting on December 7th. So if people want to watch, you can watch online. You can also submit comments, testimony for the preliminary recommendations. And I'm happy to send out the page that tells you all the ways in which you can submit that testimony. And then early next year, we will go back to the planning board with our working draft, which is the first real complete draft of the plan. So it will have all of our recommendations as well as narratives, as well as some of these documents that I mentioned, and that the planning board will comment on the working draft, and that will usually become the public hearing draft. Often, as the action of hearing, after hearing a presentation on the working draft, the planning board will make it. Hearing a presentation on the working draft will make that the public hearing draft, and then the public hearing will be set for 30 days after we post. So we have a lot more to go because then the process of work sessions with the planning board, and then the same process with the council as well in terms of a public hearing and work sessions will follow that. But we expect that to happen over the spring and summer of next year with the council. So these are our kind of upcoming milestones, and as soon as when you have feedback, the sooner we get it, the better, because we can incorporate it and consider it as part of our changes and part of our ongoing, edits to the working draft, which the preliminary recommendations really just lead into.
Lauren, I was also going to mention that before the December 7th presentation, we will have a staff report available that will kind of go through the recommendations, and we'll be sure to send that out to you all so that you can kind of see everything that we've talked about over the last several months kind of in one place. And, then as Maren mentioned, if you have written feedback that you want to share with us or with the planning board, either individually or as a committee, we'd welcome that feedback. If you have questions or just kind of want to talk through anything, feel free to reach out to us. And I see Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, one of the items that was revisited, I guess, or raised in the last meeting was that we're still waiting for the results of the traffic analysis. Have those come in, or when are we expecting those, and when will those be worked into the recommendations or the plan?
We have received the traffic analysis, and I'm happy to share the documents with you. They have been being worked into the recommendations. I should have made that more clear. Our transportation planner, Alex Rixey, who I think has been here before, but he has been working closely with our consultant who performed the modeling and some of the transportation analysis. Alex has been working with them and doing his own analysis. We've also been working closely with MCDOT. Andrew Bossy, who's on the call, organizes these epic, I would say, marathon meetings where we meet with one group after another group after another group that are MCDOT employees that cover transit, traffic, transport, all forms of transportation. So we get their comments, and we have also shared our modeling and analysis with MCDOT. So I am happy to share it with you, and it is very much part of our process for developing the recommendations.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. And Upneat?
Are these traffic analyses like public information? Like, say I told our consultants for the facility master plan, I would ask you guys for traffic analyses, which I did tell them. Am I allowed to share these analyses with them tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll add that when we post a public hearing draft, which will be this winter, early spring, we will also have technical appendices that will be associated with that public hearing draft, which includes the transportation analysis that has been completed. And so that will be more thorough of a document than sort of the information that we're able to share at this time, because we haven't sort of compiled all the pieces into a kind of thorough and complete memo for distribution. So right now the information is available, but in the winter spring timeframe, it will be available in a more complete narrative manner.
Well, it will have all the explanations
Yeah.
and like a discussion of the assumptions and other things that go into it that might not be apparent if you just are to see the raw kind of information.
Right.
In the public hearing draft that is supposed to come out in winter.
Yeah, in early next year.
Okay, thank you. I'm writing that down right now.
Can we plan to have that, presented at the committee at the time when that draft is available?
Yes, I think we can. And we can get Alex, even maybe before then, just to meet with the committee at some point. Alex, our transportation planner, who can kind of explain the process and the information definitely better than I can. So
That'd be great. So one thought when we're talking about branding the region and, promoting the region and so on, that, I'd like to offer is, I think part of the challenge with branding this particular region is that we have a lot of great assets, and we've always talked a lot about our assets. I mean, USG is an asset. We've got a few major biotechs that have facilities here. GSK and what do you call it? Well, not MedImmune anymore, but the big company that owns MedImmune, and so on. But and obviously we have the whole Shady Grove hospital and medical complexes. So these are great assets, but even those assets don't have the brand, the brand penetration, I would say, of similar assets in other competing regions. So you look at Boston. Where's the biotech center? It's in Cambridge. What else is in Cambridge? Well, one major university and access to several others. You look at the biotech regions around in the Silicon Valley area, that has access to Stanford, which Stanford funnels both talent to both, and other major regional universities. So I guess, this is something, for perhaps you to consider and the USG team to consider is, even as a resident, someone who is familiar with USG, aware of the offerings and so on, I would say that the branding of USG is part of what, and the thought process around the branding of USG is something, could be a major component of the branding of our region in general, just like the participation of major biotech employers in supporting the branding, right? So I would say generally speaking, the national profile brand of USG is not very strong. How do we go about improving, so helping USG, and how does USG go about helping us to improve that? We have, NIST is another example of a major, and NIH. These are obviously well-known brands in some senses, but the leverage we get on those brands is almost non-existent, right? Many people know of NIST, many people know of NIH, but how do we gain, how do we gain from the kind of aura of, or the halo effect of those brands in our region, in the GSSC area? It's unclear how strong of a halo effect we get from those from those extremely prestigious and powerful institutions, right? So as we think about the branding, and this isn't the first time I've raised this or we've discussed similar types of things, but in order to brand this region as a premier bio hub, which many people on this call have spent years talking about and or trying to do, we also think about how we better leverage the assets that either are premier or have the capability to have higher, more prominent branding around them that would form the core of that branding. And so I don't know, I guess the only thing I'm offering that could be useful to you, Maren and Jessica, in this conversation is it probably would be worthwhile to mention those kinds of considerations in your recommendations, and note that a key element of branding the region is going to be partnering with USG and understanding how USG is branding itself, and how other neighboring, University of Maryland isn't, at College Park is close enough at the halo effect. NIST, NIH, Shady Grove, the Shady Grove complex, GSK, AstraZeneca, we got assets. We don't use them very well, frankly. I know that the county does and the state tries to, and so I know it's out there, but ask how many people outside of the DC metro area who aren't really hardcore bio folks think of a national brand that includes all of those assets at our disposal. And I think you're going to be disappointed to find what's out there. And I think it's unfortunate that Hopkins pulled out its academic presence from this area. I think that was a little bit of a loss for that as well, by the way. But that's water under the bridge now. We have to make do with the assets we have, right?
Phil, you've just previewed the information from the consultant. I think that was the thing that struck us in as our consultant that's evaluating the opportunities for co-location of housing and life sciences, as well as different entities. The case studies that they were pulling and sharing with us were all tied to a major university presence. So we have talked about leveraging relationships with USG and the University of Maryland system, as well as the power of NIH, because it is, as you all probably know better than me, a really important piece of the puzzle here. But that is kind of, what we're hearing from the consultant. And the final chapter that we haven't quite seen yet is the recommendations. So hopefully they'll have some suggestions for how we can really leverage all the partners to compete with locations nationally that do have, Harvard, Stanford, and the Research Triangle universities.
I think you make a lot of great points, Phil, and that's a lot of the conversation that we have internally. We're in the process of better branding ourselves, so to speak, but in my opinion, it only goes but so far as the public sector or nearby community helps out in. And until recently, there were competing interests within our own county about, well, I shouldn't say until recently. There are competing interests in our own county about location of higher education institution access in Montgomery County, right? And that doesn't necessarily always help the universities at Shady Grove branding. But also the fact that 80% of our population are Black and brown, 60 to 70% are first generation college students. Those aren't necessarily populations that have helped build brands such as Harvard, Stanford, MIT, et cetera. So being able to tap into the communities that can help us build that brand would be really great for us, and getting a little bit more recognition about the opportunity that exists. A lot of the work I do is bringing young people from around Gaithersburg, Silver Spring, Montgomery Village to USG. They don't even know this area exists, right? So we need to work as a community, as a county, to really emphasize the physical and academic intellectual infrastructure that exists right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Upmeet. This has been a really great conversation with everyone. I really appreciate you guys all giving us your ideas and your thoughts and your critiques. I just want to reiterate that we're happy to hear more from you. This also won't be the last time that we come to the group. I know we do have the LSC Loop Trail also tonight, so I wanted to make space for that presentation and turn it over to Eli, who has come here to present the mandatory referral. But just want to let you know that I am happy to take any emails or calls, and that we will share that information that you asked for, and send information about how to watch or participate in the December 7th presentation. So thank you all once again.
Thanks, Marin. My name's Eli Glacier. Until recently, I was the project manager for the county's pedestrian master plan. and I'm back more in a regulatory general master planning role now. But one of the projects that I'm working on is bringing a mandatory referral for part of the LSC Loop Trail to the planning board next month, sort of in the beginning of next year. So I'll talk about that briefly, but before that, I wanted to turn it over to Steve Finley to zoom out a bit and talk about the LSC Loop Trail in general for people who may need a refresher. So Steve, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. And some of the veterans, longtime veterans on the IAC are going to recognize this project and be very familiar with it. But for some of the folks who have come along more lately, I'm just going to give a very quick high-level overview of this. It is a 3.5 mile multi-use trail that is intended really to try to tie together all of the different districts within the Life Sciences Center. A portion of that 3.5 mile loop actually goes up into the King Farm development up in the city of Gaithersburg. We coordinated with planners from Gaithersburg early on to try to make sure that that connection was there so that folks can get to and from the big King Farm development up there as part of this. And we talked about branding early on. We'll probably have to get back to that. But the concept was to create a non-auto, non-automobile transportation route that would help people be able to get around in the Life Sciences Center by bicycle, on foot, rolling, and in other ways. It's to be implemented through public capital projects and private development. Really, the primary way we're hoping to implement this is through private development. As developments and redevelopments come in, we have substantial pieces that are going to be provided by the Elm Street development at the old Public Safety Training Academy and on the Bellward campus property from the Trammell Crow development up there. But the thing that I wanted to kind of highlight about this in particular is that it's supposed to be more than just, it says typical section is 12-foot wide, shared use path with planted buffers on both sides. But the concept for the LSC Loop Trail is supposed to be more than just a strip of asphalt. It's really was intended in the Great Seneca Science Corridor Master Plan to be a placemaking feature, something that is done so nicely and attractively that it attracts people to walk on it, to ride on it, to use it, to make it pleasant to use this trail. So it's supposed to include some design features like some landscaping, some unique pavement patterns, shading and green panels, benches, public artwork, and unique branding to make it known that you're on the LSC Loop Trail and where you are on the LSC Loop Trail as part of this. So it's supposed to become a feature that will help add to making the Life Sciences Center a place. To that end, these design guidelines were developed, and previous iterations of the Implementation Advisory Committee put a lot of work in on this. We hired a consultant. The consultant came in and met several times with the IAC in the past. These were developed and released in 2015, and they remain an important document that needs to be referred to as the LSC Loop Trail is being developed. That having been said, I'm going to, in a minute here, turn this back over to Eli to talk about the mandatory referral, which is making progress toward establishing the alignment and some of the engineering for the trail. But it is only a 35% design. And so a lot of the features that will ultimately make this into a place are not part of the design yet. This is really a mandatory referral that is establishing the alignment and the right-of-way and helping to address some of the critical engineering challenges and considerations in order to make this into what we need it to be. And some of the fine details about benches and artwork and landscaping will be added in later phases of the design of this trail. That's kind of all it at a high level, but again, veterans of the IAC will remember this very well, and it's one of the more significant work products that I think the IAC has contributed to the planning and development of this area. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Eli and let him go through some of the details.
Thanks, Steve. So as Steve sort of talked about the entire loop and mentioned the PSTA site. This site is under construction now and features a 12-foot shared use path, 8-foot tree panel on the street side, and a 6.5-foot tree panel on the building side, which is sort of in the lime green section of the loop. You can see here the mandatory referral that we have that the planning department, that MCDOT transmitted to the planning department is for the section between Great Seneca Highway and Research Drive along Medical Center Drive and Omega Drive, which is sort of the neon line work you can see here. And I would say typically this is 12-foot wide shared use path with 6-foot plus landscaping buffer. The minimum width is about 6 feet. It goes up to 11 or 12 feet. And this is a mandatory referral that I'll be presenting to the planning board on January 18th, 2024. What a mandatory referral is, for people who don't know, is the planning department, the planning board provides advice and input on public projects that other agencies, both state and local, are doing in the county. And MCDOT is leading the design of this project, and that's they're coming to us. These projects typically come to the planning board at 35% design, and that's where we're at today. I think an interesting quirk about this project is that generally mandatory referrals are for projects that public agencies intend to build. But as Steve said, we anticipate that the majority of the LSC Loop Trail will be built through private development. So what's going to happen with this project is that the Department of Transportation is going to review the comments that the planning board transmits as part of the mandatory referral process, and then incorporate them to the extent feasible and bring this design to 100%. And as adjacent properties come in for redevelopment, those properties will construct segments of the trail with, I think Steve's absolutely right. The design that we have for the mandatory referral does not have all of the placemaking, benches, other sort of unique elements that the design guidelines have sort of outlined. The way I would view ultimately what the design that MCDOT advances for this is sort of the minimum, the floor for what we would expect from private development. Through the development process and the regulatory process, there will be significant opportunities to work with property owners to design and make sort of provide context sensitive spaces for placemaking and things like that. So I just have a few, we can walk through the whole thing very quickly. I know we're running out of time, but ostensibly starting at Great Seneca, we have a 12-foot trail with an 11-foot buffer. There are a number of driveways and street crossings throughout this corridor, and I think the planning department has already started reviewing, making comments internally for discussion about some of the issues we'd like to present to the planning board about this design. And I think the main one sort of focuses on sort of driveway crossings and intersection crossings. So things like the geometry of the intersections, making sure that the turning radii of these intersections are such that vehicles are turning at a slow rate of speed with visible, like, so drivers can see bicyclists and pedestrians using the trails, things like that. And that those types of recommendations generally carry throughout. You can see some amenity areas have been sort of sketched in. I think we would anticipate that through the private development process, these areas would become more fleshed out, and sort of they would ultimately look less generic and be more unique to the sites that they're on. But yeah, I think you can see here still a 12-foot trail with an 11-foot buffer from the street, which we would classify as a very comfortable experience for people walking and biking, separated from traffic significantly. I think we do see the potential for crossing conflicts here throughout the corridor, particularly at these parking access and other driveways and things like that. And then the trail continues up to Key West, where it has to navigate sort of this major crossing of Key West Avenue, and then terminates for now at Research Boulevard, which is sort of the extent of the project. And then people will be able to cross Omega Drive and continue on Research Boulevard if they so choose. So I would just say I'll coordinate to send out these links via email, but if you have feedback on this design or things that you think the planning board should consider or the staff should consider in writing and providing and developing the staff report for this mandatory referral, I would invite you to review these documents, and then you can also submit testimony for the mandatory referral at this link, which we will provide via email. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I think this, once completed, will be a great amenity for this area, and the extent to which it can be designed at a really high level from the beginning will make it much more likely to be a success. So this is an important step in the process of implementing the LSC track. Mark.
Have you overlaid this with the recommendations that the team was going to make from our previous discussion? Because I know a lot of that area between like Great Seneca and Shady Grove, you know, east to west, and Key West to Darnestown, north to south, they were going to put a lot more streets in there, right? And have more of a grid approach to the streets. And it seems like that's going to greatly increase the number of intersections, at least in that section of the loop.
So I haven't overlaid that yet. We have the countywide team that I work on has been coordinating with Alex Rixey and Jessica and Maren and the rest of the team on this. I think what I would anticipate doing through the mandatory referral process is providing comments generally about high quality intersection design along this corridor, which would apply both to intersections that exist today and then intersections that are for streets that are master planned that aren't in existence yet as well.
And Eli, I can also, this is Maren, I can just also add that we have in our transportation plans and maps had an overlay of the LSC alignment, because the alignment of the LSC loop trail was established by the 2010 plan. So we've included it in kind of our analysis as we've.
And I'll add one other thing, which is that we're actually meeting in the coming weeks with MCDOT to talk specifically about the design that's shown in the mandatory referral and how we can make sure that we're coordinating that with the plan recommendations. So this is sort of one of those situations where, the processes aren't in complete alignment, but we'll, make sure that we're coordinating and communicating across agencies to try to bring them into alignment. And if we can do that through, as Eli mentioned, language in the mandatory referral as well as in the plan.
So the section of the loop that is in the jurisdiction of City of Gaithersburg at the top, it's not covered by this mandatory referral. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the extent is just from Great Seneca along Medical Center up to Research Boulevard. So really the end of the county's jurisdiction along the loop trail on that part.
So is the City of Gaithersburg actively involved in reviewing, discussing, aligning any of its plans? So that's I guess Bellward up there is what we're looking at. I know the Hopkins stakeholders are in the discussion, but I'm a little bit vague on the role. What role Gaithersburg is playing, and if it's they're actively involved right now, and so on, and how they're going to come into alignment with what you're proposing here.
Laura's actually on the call today. I'm not sure, Laura, if you have any, and I think, Phil, you're specifically talking about the extent into the downtown Crown area.
Oh, is that Crown up there? I'm sorry. I thought it was.
Yeah, just sort of north of the LSC where it says City of Gaithersburg in very small letters. That would be the downtown Crown area. And I don't know, Laura, if you could talk at all about the, bikeway infrastructure on that would tee up with the LSC loop. And I see, Laura, you unmuted, but I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yep, there you are.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So that predated my time with the city, but Stephen mentioned earlier when he gave his intro that we did work with the county to put in a shared use path along Coverly and Fields Road in anticipation of connecting in the future to the loop trail. So that's the extent of the information I have for you, but we do already have, I don't know how wide it is, if it's 8 or 10 feet, but there is already an existing shared use path that was put in when Crown was first developed.
So, I guess it's fair to say that it's going to be as part of the longer term planning and recommendations around this. If this City of Gaithersburg's components don't share common design considerations and guidelines as the rest of the path, then the path is going to feel pretty disjointed as you get up into the Crown area, right? I guess the last comment I'd make is I would hope that the county would be actively making outreach to the city to let the city begin its process around considering how it will incorporate the similar design elements. So this actually looks like a complete and comprehensive amenity as opposed to a path that kind of ends at, has identity until you hit the border of Gaithersburg, right? That would be unfortunate.
Yeah, this is Steve. I'll go ahead and just add one more thing. We recognized that because of the different timetables that we were working on with Crown developing well ahead of the rest of the LSC loop planning and development, that they would not be identical on both sides of the jurisdictional boundary. But one thing we did talk quite a bit about was at least doing branding. And we probably need to loop back with the City of Gaithersburg and talk more about how we can have a kind of uniform branding ultimately as we get later into the trail so that people will recognize that when they go into Gaithersburg or when they go into Montgomery County from Gaithersburg, that there are certain key identifying features in the branding that help them know and understand that it's all part of the LSC loop. We probably need to loop back with the city on that. Loop back.
I thought you did that on purpose. But that's all I have. So again, I posted the link to the documents in the chat, and then a link to sign up to submit testimony for the mandatory referral, which will be in mid-January. So with that, I guess I'll throw it back to Martin.
Thank you, Eli. So, Bill, I'm not sure if we have anything else. We have a couple of follow-up items, which it sounds like both from Eli and myself after this. And as Jessica mentioned, there is also the consideration of whether the committee would like to submit anything for the mandatory referral or for the preliminary recommendations or maybe the working draft together. But other than that, I think that our presentations are complete for the planning department.
Well, thanks, Marn. I guess I'll offer to the committee is are folks feeling that there's anything that as a committee that we should be discussing, offering comment on, either for the plan recommendations or for the mandatory referral for the LSC loop. Seems like we're not getting a lot of ideas being offered there. So obviously, it's already been mentioned that folks have the opportunity, either individually, I imagine, their organizations, to offer comment on these plans. So there's every opportunity to do that, and there will be more opportunities for us to discuss them going forward. But I guess Maren and Jessica, Steve, is there anything else you would want to cover with the committee before we move towards wrapping up the meeting?
I think that was all the items that we had to discuss on the agenda tonight. But we are, as always, available if anyone has follow-up questions or wants to discuss anything specifically. And we do continue to welcome your thoughts and feedback both on the plan recommendations as well as the mandatory referral.
Thanks. So committee, any other business that we need to cover before we wrap up this meeting? Again, opening up the floor to any topics.
Well, I just wanted to let people know, if you're not aware, that tomorrow we usually do groundbreaking, but tomorrow is a ground painting, for those who want to know, ceremony to celebrate the development of the Great Seneca Transit Network. So they're going to be doing red paint, I think, at the University of Shady Grove at the Treville. I don't know exactly. You have to look at the location. I believe it's at the Treville Transit Center. And that these are two routes that will be under construction, perhaps early next year. So I think that's pretty exciting to serve this area, to serve the Great Seneca Science center. So it's a really significant improvement with bus lanes, bus priority, queue jumps, and improved shelters and stops. So if anybody is available, I think, what is it? I'm looking at trying to look at the announcement I have in front of me. 10:15 at the Treville Parkway Transit Center in Rockville. So.
And I think I have a link to the release, and so I can drop that in the chat. Thanks for mentioning that, Gary. It's really exciting.
It is, and it's
Very
exciting,
exciting.
and it's part of the transportation network we've been talking about.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Okay. Does anybody else have any business or topics they'd like to cover before we wrap up? Okay. Well, then, I'll move to, adjourn. Anybody want a second?
I'll second.
Great. Then, unless there are any objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.